Soler has had a great year.
The Cubs right fielder Jorge Soler used to play for the Cuban national team. The Cuban fans were well aware that the Cubs were facing a one-game playoff that night against the Pittsburgh Pirates.
So I have a request. I need you to root for the Cubbies today. More baseball in Cuba, more baseball in the United States, right?
Pritzker said later she likes the idea of a Cubs cheering section in Havana. In a plaza not far away, the secretary stumbled on what looked like a group of young school children. They were wearing red and white uniforms and lined up in formation. The kids were actually members of the Pioneros, a kind of socialist scout troop. They were practicing for a ceremony the next day in which they'd each be awarded a red scarf, pledging their allegiance to Martí and Fidel.
Por la patria del socialismo. Moncadita.
For country and socialism, the children say, we're always ready. It was a little odd watching the U.S. Commerce Secretary smiling at these miniature Marxists, but Pritzker gamely urged the kids to pay attention to their instructor and have fun.
It will make you very happy, and it will make your parents very proud.
And speaking of proud papas, Pritzker ducked into the lobby of the Ambos Mundos Hotel, which Ernest Hemingway called home back in the 1930s. Months have gone by since President Obama and Raul Castro announced their diplomatic thaw. Since then, the U.S. government's been easing restrictions on travel and trade, but the fundamental embargo still applies. Pritzker says the two countries are in the early stages of rebuilding trust around conference tables, in government ministries, or just walking the streets of Old Havana. Flying home to Washington that night, Pritzker passed around glasses of Cuban rum. Halfway through the trip, the pilot came on to announce the Cubs had beaten the Pirates 4-0. More baseball to cheer for in Chicago and in Havana's Parque Central. Scott Worsley, NPR News.
Custom-made Jaguar limos follow the Victorian carriage. It's the typical theatrical display of a Cockney funeral, Cockneys being the traditional white working class of this area.
That was a typical East End funeral, but Caribbean style.
In fact, the cars carried Jamaican flags. John Harris says it's the new normal in the East End as he watches the procession go by. He runs the T. Cribs and Sons Funeral Home, and if anyone knows how the East End has changed, he does. His great-grandfather founded the business, and the family became the go-to place for a Cockney send-off.
There is a pageant, there's a ceremony, it is a celebration of someone's life.
The conductors wear three-piece suits with coattails, top hats, and carry canes. Harris says growing up, this was always a diverse area because of the docks and the textile industry, but it used to be predominantly white and working class.
They'd be out all weekend, there'd be parties, there'd be drinking, they'd all be smart, they'd have their suit. Come Monday morning, the suits are going to the pawn shop.
Back at the office, he describes the East End now.
The East End isn't here anymore. The East End now is gone out to Essex.
It happened over the last 15 years. Immigrants continued to make this place home, and soon the Cockney culture was all but gone. It had moved out to the suburbs, and it was replaced by working-class South Asians, Africans, East Asians. The latest wave is Eastern Europeans and hipsters. So Harris diversified and specialized. He shows me how.
What we've got here is a washroom. This was put primarily for the Sikh and Indian families.
On the other side of the door, Harris points out a wall of tributes where ashes of the deceased were stored. It was created for the Chinese and Vietnamese community. The families believe one soul passes and the other stays here. they bring gifts to the soul.
Boxes of chocolates, crisps, bottles of wine, water, tin of Coke, whatever their favourite.
Others who saw the wall liked the idea. Now there are stern Europeans and white Englishmen on the wall too.
You get this cross-pollination of cultures and traditions.
Harris kept his old clientele by opening branches in the suburbs, and for his new Ghanaian clients, he even has a branch in their own country so that he can repatriate their bodies. But the Muslim market has been tricky, says Harris, and that's about 35% of this area now.
We looked at the whole setup and thought, well, how can we get in on this? You know, far short of changing me religion.
He's tried everything. He hired a Muslim woman and opened a school to teach young Muslims how to wash and prepare bodies according to Islam. He even launched an app for young British Muslims who've lost touch with their traditions.
Nowadays, we all get straight on. You press your, what should I do this afternoon down a mosque act, and it's all there.
But so far, the London mosques still have the Muslim funeral business pretty much on lockdown.
I might have gone too early on it.
London's East End is constantly changing. It's the second and third generation that will want the same pomp and circumstance, Harris says. Those will be his new clients. Layla Fulton, NPR News, London.
WNYC is supported by the Autumn Crafts Festival outdoors at Lincoln Center this weekend with 250 fine craft displays, demonstrations, entertainment, and food. 11 a.m. to 8:30 Saturday and 10 to 6:30 Sunday, 64th Street and Columbus Avenue. WNYC is a media partner of American Composers Orchestra's Sonic Festival, October 15th through 23rd at 10 venues throughout New York City, featuring ensembles Alarm Will Sound, Jack Quartet, Roomful of Teeth, Wild Up, Face the Music, and more. Tickets at sonicfestival.org.
This week on Only Human, Jamie puts her trust in one medication.
It's hard to know if lithium is actually, if it dampens my personality or if it allows me to just sort of be who I am.
But the drug that keeps her sane also makes her sick. Listen to the new podcast from WNYC that takes a fearless look at health at onlyhuman.org or on the WNYC app, because everybody has a story.
Check out the podcast online and stay tuned to WNYC. You can hear it on the old-fashioned radio in just about 20 minutes during Weekend Edition Saturday. Coming up next, as legislators fail to find solutions to mass shootings, evangelical minister Rob Shank believes that religious groups have a part to play in educating people about guns and their relationships with them. That story just ahead on Weekend Edition. Some upstate New York cowboys riding on horseback and accompanied by tracking dogs have rounded up a cow that's been roving the Mohawk Valley for months. Cowboys from Washington County contacted Utica police after word of the wandering cow spread through media reports. They cornered the brown and white bovine in woods near a Home Depot store in New Hartford Friday afternoon. Police haven't been able to track down the owner of the cow, which had been roaming around a busy area of stores and businesses in the Utica area since June. The cowboys say they'll try to find a more suitable home. It is 52 degrees now. It'll be sunny today, the high 63, down to 50 tonight, sunny and 68 on Sunday, and Columbus Day sunny and 74 degrees. WNYC.
Support for NPR comes from member stations and from Inada, Japanese maker of full-body massage chairs, including the Flex 3S with auto-adaptive and body scanning technology. Learn more at inadausa.com and at Relax the Back store locations nationwide. And DreamWorks Pictures, presenting Bridge of Spies, directed by Steven Spielberg. Tom Hanks stars as an ordinary man enlisted by the CIA to negotiate a high-stakes prisoner exchange during the height of the Cold War. In theaters everywhere, October 16th.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Scott Simon. The debate over guns after a shooting may seem to sound like the same old arguments. The Reverend Rob Shank might be a different voice. He's an evangelical leader, an anti-abortion activist who is president of Faith in Action, a Christian outreach organization, and he's turned his attention to guns. He joins us in our studios. Reverend Shank, thanks very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
I don't want to characterize your views. I wouldn't call them on gun policy, but something else.
Yeah, for me, the whole question of gun use, ownership, for defensive purposes, and I make a distinction with that. I think when you're talking about hunting and sportsmanship, you have a different discussion. But for me, when you talk about aiming a weapon at another human being, no matter what the circumstances are, that's a question of paramount moral and ethical dimensions. So it's something we should take very seriously, and I don't know that a lot of us are.
So you're not necessarily calling for gun control at the legal level, but in a funny way, personal gun control.
Well, I don't think of it so much as funny, because ultimately we'll all make the decision what we will do, whether we'll own a lethal weapon and use it or not. You know, we've had a long discussion in this country, decades long now, on gun control, that is government gun control. For me, this is a question of self-control. Regardless of what the law may allow me to do, I appeal to a higher law. And I've said publicly that in our respecting of the Second Amendment, we have to be very careful we don't break the Second Commandment, which is the commandment against idolatry. And we can set up our own idolatry when we declare ourselves the arbiters of right and wrong, and especially of the value of a human life.
Do you see your views on guns as being consistent with your pro-life views as well?
Most certainly. I've been a pro-life advocate for 30 years. I see life as having value from the moment of conception, but there's a whole lot of life after conception. It's a pro-life question, and it's a deeply moral question, and it's even, for me, a theological question.
Forgive me if this is a personal question, but you kind of opened the door. Do you own a gun?
I do not.
On principle, or?
On principle. I've made the decision not to own a weapon. There's a lot of reasons for that. One is, I think it does create an ethical crisis for a Christian. Secondly, I don't necessarily trust myself, and maybe more of us would be better off to question what we will do in the heat of anger, fear, or, God forbid, depression. My own family has a history of gun suicide due to depression. I know depression runs in families. I don't want to take that risk.
And what might you say, probably not a hypothetical, I bet you've had this question from people who say, look, I feel the need to own a gun for the defense, the self-defense of me and my family. And I think more or less I ought to be able to walk in someplace and walk out with a gun.
Sure. And I understand that impulse, and I respect it. I don't impugn people's motives on that. I think an awful lot of those people are sincere, and that's a noble inclination that we have. Now, whether the handgun, a lethal weapon, is the best way to manage that security for yourself and your family is another question, because sometimes a handgun can be a shortcut in the equation.
Do you think it's possible that that religious leaders and ethical leaders might be able to reach some kind of breakthrough with each other? I don't even want to broach the word compromise that political leaders have missed.
Yes, I do. First of all, I don't want to sound too cynical, but I think politicians are, on the whole, eminently disqualified from really giving us good guidance on this question, because, of course, they're in the business of politics. That means winning elections. They're going to do what's in their best electoral interests on the question. I hope that religious leaders are, for the most part, in a pursuit of the truth. So I've decided I'm going to shift where my people are most comfortable, and that's the law of the heart and of the mind and of the conscience. And after that, I think we can probably get to some consensus on policy and legislation.
The Reverend Rob Schenck, President of Faith in Action, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
In Israel, a group of government rabbis decide who is officially Jewish. The designation is critical. It affects marriage options and the status of children. But the rules exclude hundreds of thousands of Israelis who consider themselves Jewish. Now a rival rabbinical group is challenging the system with a new path for converting to Judaism. NPR's Emily Harris reports.
כן.
יאללה, איך תתלבשי?
לא נוציא להוג.
7-year-old Lehi loves swimming and dancing and playing with her dad's phone. Israelis Amit and Regina Goldstein adopted Lehi from Ukraine when she was a toddler. They didn't know her religion, but that didn't matter, says Amit Goldstein, because she's now their child and they're raising her Jewish.
She lives in a Jewish house in a Jewish family. We do keep the Chagim, the holidays. We don't work Shabbat. You know, the basics. And that's what she knows.
But if Lehi's national ID doesn't say she's Jewish when she's an adult, Lehi would have to leave Israel to get married. There are no civil marriages here. Her children would not be considered Jewish. Amit Goldstein says he didn't want his daughter to feel different from mainstream society or from her siblings.
It's important for us that she would be also like them, like us.
No doubt. The Goldsteins could have converted Lehi through Israel's official rabbinate, but they didn't want to. It would have required certain displays of faith, such as attending religious school or following strict dietary rules that conflict with the Goldsteins' largely secular Jewish life. Regina Goldstein.
It's hopeless because it's like common knowledge that you have to convert all your life around, or you have to stand there and lie.
Even religious Jews have run into trouble. Yaakov Lasri, a devout Jew his entire life, sat in on official conversion classes for more than a year while his wife attended. She's a Ukrainian immigrant, born Catholic. They married abroad. In what should have been the couple's final interview, a rabbi asked him this.
How is
it that you, a religious person active in synagogue, is sleeping with a Goya?
Goya means a non-Jewish woman. In this context, it's derogatory. The couple quit the official process, as more than half of those who sign up do. Eventually, they and the Goldsteins turned to a new alternative way to convert to Judaism in Israel.
This initiative is a game changer.
Seth Farber is an Orthodox rabbi and a key force in the new conversion court, which requires knowledge of Judaism but gives more latitude in how it's practiced. These conversions are not recognized by Israel, but they challenge the system.
Whether this will bring down the rabbinate or not, that remains to be seen.
The new court is mainly targeting Israeli immigrants from the former Soviet Union, some 350,000, a third of the million who moved here in the 1990s, were Jewish enough to easily become citizens, but they and their children, including Israeli soldiers, are not Jewish enough for the official rabbinate's stricter interpretation. Rabbi Farber.
We've created in Israel a fifth column of people who are serving our country and a full part of our country, but our country doesn't recognize them.
He says this also alienates Israel from less religious Jews around the world.
They don't feel connected, and it's not only about the security thing. It's about their personal status.
Farber wants more Israelis to be active, religious Jews, and one of the top critics of the new conversion court doesn't question the religious credentials of the organizers. Here's the thinking of Ziv Maor, a former spokesman for the government rabbinate. He says this new court could open the door for all kinds of conversions. In his eyes, that means mixed marriages and a real threat to the future of Judaism.
There is no gas chambers, and there is no death, and there is no sorrow. There is only happiness of a young couple and their families that wants to be together. And I appreciate it. But